Well, hello and welcome. My name's Clive Holtham. I'm a professor at the Bayes Business School. I'm an accountant by background, and my two colleagues will be introducing themselves in a few minutes. I'd just like to start off with something that ideas that developed through my whole career, and that is about the nature of knowledge. I've always felt for decades that knowledge was something intrinsic to humans. Machines were very clever at computation and organizing data and information, but knowledge was really something reserved for humans. And I'm interested in the present context in what David and Ron feel about this, and that's the core of our discussion. So I'd like to hand over to you, Ron, to introduce yourself and to give us your initial thoughts on my idea there.
Okay, thank you, Clive. So I'm Ron Young, I'm from Knowledge Associates, and we're based in Cambridge, UK. Yes, for a long time, Clive, I've always thought that knowledge is just intrinsic to humans. And then more recently, with recent AI developments, I started to talk about human knowledge, and people said to me exactly what you said. Well, isn't knowledge human? That's the wrong term. But I go back to the 1980s when I was really interested in those days in artificial intelligence. And there were two schools of thought, one which deals with expert systems, putting the knowledge of human beings into an application with some inference. And so we did some good work developing. For example, the most popular one was doctors diagnosing patients in the first visit, where it would make some recommendations and conclusions. But at that time, I was taught at Essex University about machine knowledge. I come from actually a knowledge management background, helping organizations better manage their knowledge, predominantly human knowledge. But even there was confusion between the terms, what is information and what is knowledge. And now I suggest to you that people are talking much more about human knowledge and machine knowledge, or human intelligence and machine intelligence. And I'd add one other thing. That is that I was also taught in that school of expert systems. The other school, of course, was neural networking, but I chose the expert system route. In the expert systems school of thought for AI, they have a special subject area called knowledge representation, which is not just looking at data and information and databases that are more passive, but the idea then in the 1980s was that knowledge could be more interactive with humans. And there was a form of knowledge representation, which, if you like, is almost a bridge between the passive information and the more active human knowledge. But today, that's gone a little further, has it not? Because in the neural networking side, if you train a large model, it creates all these different weights. Looking at all the big data, it will create weights to help with probability. And that group of weights is referred to in AI as the knowledge within, the digital knowledge within. So I'm broadening my thoughts about what knowledge really is and suggesting that it's both human and there is a machine interpretation as well.
Well, thanks, Ron, especially for putting our discussion in a historical context. Can I pass over now to David for you to introduce yourself and to comment?
Okay, I'm not so sure about some of that one, but we'll come to that. David Gurteen. I've been working in the knowledge management field for many, many years. Bit of a jack of all trades in some ways. I'm a thinker, I'm a writer, I'm a consultant, I'm a conversationalist, and as I say, probably a few more other things. This business about knowledge, let's see if I can't give my view, if you like, quite concisely, at least to start with. I think that knowledge, only exists in the mind, and that needn't necessarily be a human mind, but in an animal mind, and that everything else is information. But when we speak, we're encoding that knowledge. We're actually generating information, a little bit like Gen AI in some ways. So we're converting that knowledge in our minds into a stream of audible sound, which is just an encoding. If we write it down, if we type it down, any other form that it takes is information, and that's still my view today. Even if we look at AI, what is stored in the computer, to my mind, it's not a form of knowledge. You could label it that way if you want. It's a form of information. I mean, very highly structured information, and there's algorithms and things there going on that are taking that like internal representation of knowledge. Maybe I'm starting to use your words here, Ron, and is generating it as a stream of words, or just a stream of keystrokes, or what have you. So for me, it only exists in the mind. Anything else is information.
Yeah, sorry, Clive. I know. Can I just briefly add there?
Yeah, go on.
The problem is none of us know what knowledge really is, and that's a difficulty. We can all have different views about it, and I would also bring in the word intelligence as well.
But do you think for 1 minute that what's stored in an LLM has got any similarity to what's stored in some sense in the human mind?
I do. I mean, I see.
It's all text. It's all textual based. It's got none of the emotions and the experience of the real world that a human being's got. So it's to my mind, it's really, really hard to see that they've got any similarity at all.
Well, I'm not suggesting that machine knowledge is equal to human knowledge by any means. There's a lot more to human knowledge. But what I'm trying to say is that the machine itself, a large language learning model, doesn't have content in it. It is actually made up of all these parameters and weights and probabilities as a result of being exposed and sensing a lot of text, or now text and image. It creates, it's very good at pattern recognition, and it creates weights. That digital representation, to me, is a form of intelligence or knowledge, if you will. It's not passive information, passive data. That would be my point.
Yeah, I would go along with the fact that it's not passive.
Yeah.
I, for decades, have stuck to the idea that there is data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And I'm quite happy to stick to that. I'm quite happy to accept what David has said. However, what is different about generative AI is that the machine can behave as if it were knowledgeable. And this is a massive step forward from where we have been. The conversations that any of us can have with a large language model are of a completely different nature from what we've traditionally been able to achieve. So I'm no longer worried about whether machines or humans have got knowledge. I am interacting with that large language model as if it were knowledgeable. And some of the responses, particularly coming back to your point, David, do show an understanding of emotion. The machine itself may not have emotion, but it knows how to create new sets of words, sentences, paragraphs, whole documents that have emotional qualities in them. In fact, some of the experiments we've been doing imply that because machines have got access, for example, to the whole world of fiction, that they're able to generate quite deep insights into human behavior, dysfunctions, and so on in a, in equally sensible way to what the three of us might come up with.
I mean, I think, when I was first playing with ChatGPT, I was incredibly skeptical. And, and then, asking these questions, well, is it knowledgeable? Is it intelligent? And I came to the conclusion, it doesn't really matter. I mean, is it helpful? Is it helping me think? Is it helping me understand the world better? Is it helping me make better decisions? And the answer was yes. So I thought, I don't really care. I mean, this is highly useful, regardless of whether we call it knowledge information or knowledge representation or whatever. It's useful, very useful.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. To take Clive's point as well about mimicking, human beings mimic a lot as well. For example, I remember with AI, a lot of work psychologists and psychotherapists put in their knowledge about how to gain empathy by pacing, as it's called. If a patient is saying something, you repeat back more or less what they've said, and pacing. And quite often the patient will come out of the session and say, you know more about me than I know about myself, or it's amazing how much you know about me. But they're just employing a pacing technique to repeat back to them for a whole variety of reasons. The other thing is auto-suggestion. Human beings in conversation are very like AI in that when we listen to people, we should be listening to people for the right reasons, but often we're listening to people to then work out how to respond back to them. And we almost auto-suggest, just like the machine does. We suddenly get a trigger and it auto-suggests back to other people. So we're triggering one another all the time. I think the machine helps us to trigger us as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a lot of criticism of ChatGPT and the large language models for hallucinations, which may well be, commonplace where you're dealing with factual matters. But as we move on to more complex human interrelations, which are not just down purely to facts, my experience is that the large language models are, in fact, extraordinarily good listeners. I mean, many of us lack, quality of our listening skills, some or all of the time. And yet these large language models sit there patiently listening, politely listening, if I can put it like that, but carefully listening.
Patiently.
And this seems to me a quite extraordinary quality that's now emerging from the latest version.
Let's just pick up on the hallucination. I think hallucination in some ways is a feature rather than a bug, if you like, because it means that we cannot totally trust what it's saying in the same way that I can't trust what you're saying, Clive, or you, Ron, that I've got to question it for myself.
Yes.
That's what I like about the hallucinations. You've got to look at it and question it. I found one of the things when I prompt the AIs is that a lot of the time, if I'm not careful, I will bias its reply in my prompt. And so I've learned that if I'm really trying to get at the root of something, I give it a very simple question. I avoid all assumption, all bias, and then it gives me maybe not a more truthful answer because it's drawing on its database, if you like, but it avoids building into it some of my false assumptions.
I think on hallucinations, that is obviously very apparent with neural networks, large language models, because they're based on probability. And they will make mistakes. Latest statistics are that apparently between 20 and 30% can be hallucinations, right? But large language models, I say with respect, is only one part of AI. There is the other part. I mentioned the school with expert systems, which unlike neural networks, expert systems is about putting logic and reason and deduction into the machine itself. And what's been happening in the last 2 years, actually ever since DeepMind and AlphaGo and AlphaFold, they've been combining both neural networks and probability and examining all different scenarios together with structure, meaning, reason, logic. And this school of AI is now the merging of the two, which is called neurosymbolic AI. It's a combination of logic and reason and probability. I suggest that's going to have a big impact on the way we look at AI in the future, not just where it is today with just neural networks.
Yes, I mean, some people refer to that, Ron, as hybrid AI, which I think is a useful term, and it's good that you remind us that what we are at the moment is a very intermediate stage, and what is yet to come is going to be even more dramatic, in my view, for the very reason that you've given, that we'll be combining human expertise with machine-based outcomes. One thing I'm concerned about is this use of the word reasoning. This is, as you know, commonplace in classical AI, but it's the sort of word where I'm now becoming uncomfortable. If we overinterpret and actually genuinely believe machines can reason, I feel uncomfortable with that. They can provide us with advice, suggestions, proposals, and of course, where it comes to logical reasoning, they're very good. But the area that I'm interested in, which is wisdom, human wisdom, I think we've got to be very cautious about the language that we use from the point of view of misleading the average person.
I agree. There is a lot of confusion in these words, and we need help to clarify what we mean by this. Just like we had with information and knowledge, we need to have the same with digital and biological knowledge or intelligence or whatever, call it.
We're drawing to a conclusion now. Well, I wonder, David, if you and then Ron would like to give a kind of overall view on your optimism or pessimism about how our understanding of knowledge and our ability to exploit knowledge are going to change over the next, say, decade.
Okay. I'm naturally an optimist. I don't think the human species, sort of humanity, has evolved to this stage only to destroy itself. I guess we could set ourselves back a few thousand years if we destroyed modern civilization, but we would probably rise from the ashes again. So I'm not overly concerned about existential threats, although they do exist. Certainly threats from bad actors. AI has got the potential to do a tremendous amount of harm. But when I weigh it against the positive side, the ability to improve critical thinking, the ability to improve education, the ability to sort out some of the entangled mess of the so-called meta crisis, I'm actually very, very positive. The one thing that does concern me is that people talk a lot about regulation. We've never managed to regulate technology ever, except maybe nuclear weapons. But nuclear weapons weren't the sort of thing that you could build in your basement, yes, or your garage. You needed a lot of money and a lot of expertise. But today, so many people have got the ability to to work in this field, and it's hard to see that there are not going to be bad actors in the world. And if there are bad actors in the world, it's very hard to see how the hell we're going to regulate it. So I'm in two minds.
Ron?
I am also an optimist. I've always been, and I'm an idealist as well. But I do worry about the risk. But the reason I'm optimistic is I really think it will make has the potential for tremendous benefit for humanity, without doubt. It's not the AI that's wrong, it's the use of the AI that concerns me. Health and education, it will completely disrupt and revolutionize for the better, in my opinion. And I'm also very hopeful with the future of AI, because what interests me very much at the moment is the way that these digital machines are not just probabilistic machines. They can work with context. The context that goes, right now, Google, for example, have context windows with 1 million tokens, which means approximately 1 million words. You can feed in books, you can feed in anything else you like, papers that you've written or whatever. And it puts that information in context. And that to me is towards a part of what knowledge is, an aspect of what knowledge is. Information in context. And that context is getting greater and greater, larger and larger. So I'm very optimistic about the way AI will develop and its potential for the future. But I'm also worried as well about the misuse, the accident, or the risks associated. And I guess I'm worried that because we're now talking about artificial general intelligence, supposedly around the corner, or 2030, artificial superintelligence and that sort of thing. What worries me is that the speed of development of these machines will be beyond what human capability, and we're working now with what's called intelligent agents, and how these intelligent agents, digital agents, can work on the web together. I believe, therefore, and that's where I would probably differ with you, David, I think we need the regulation against that. That worries me. Apart from that, I'm extremely positive, and I look forward to what's always happened with humanity, which the good has always been overpowered the bad. But AI to me is a massive transformer, and I hope for the good of humanity. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll just add a few final thoughts, which after initial pessimism about generative AI, I've now become, like you, Ron, quite a great optimist. But I am concerned about the social aspects, the intellectual property right aspects, the privacy aspects, and indeed the whole ethics generally. And partly because of the point that David has made, that historically, as societies, we've been weak in dealing with this. I think this is where a kind of a red line has to be drawn, where governments and international bodies really start putting their foot down. We cannot be driven solely by the interests of Californian tech companies. We have to bear in mind the much bigger pictures as well, and sadly we've been extremely poor at doing that as society. So that's my slight pessimistic conclusion. So thanks very much, David and Ron, for your wise words, and we look forward to producing our next podcast in the not too distant future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clive.
Thank you, Clive.